Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Jacob.
It's very weird to stand on the bima. I don't like it. I don't think it's what I'm going to do in general. Sometimes on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, the custom has been, some years, to have a panel discussion. And really this year there was only one thing that we could talk about if we were to be honest with ourselves at all. There's really only one thing that's been on our mind this year, which is we're going to talk a little bit about Israel and the relationship between the American and Israeli Jewish communities and how that relationship affects our community and how we relate in community. It seems to me that all of us, no matter where we're coming from politically, and by politically I mean like what we think the problems are and what we think are the best ways to address them and what needs to happen, no matter what we think the problems and solutions are, we are all in mourning in some way. We are all grieving this year, and it's been an incredibly taxing and long slog of a year. And I know that we keep harping on that, but we're in a new one, so that's good. And one of the things that we're mourning, at least for me, is itself the sense that what I am grieving is not the same as what my neighbor is grieving. That the things that are deeply important to me and seem obvious to me ethically maybe, might be different from a person who I care deeply about in my community, and that isolation adds a layer of grieving on top of the already very painful mourning. And so we wanted to address that a little bit. And we wanted to give an opportunity to hear from people of pretty different perspectives who nevertheless really respect each other and enjoy even having difficult conversation with each other. A little bit to model how that can happen, but a little bit also just to give voice to different perspectives, and to represent the ultimate value of machloket l'shem shamayim, of productive disagreement for God's sake. One thing that Rabbi Mark said in the preparation for this is that, quoting Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, is that in a machloket she'eino l'shem shamayim, in an argument for argument's sake, or an argument that you are trying to dominate or win, where you're not able to listen to each other, if you win, you win, and if you lose, but really if you win, you lose. Because nobody changed and nobody grew. And nothing really happened. In a machloket l'shem shamayim, if you win and the other person agrees with you, then you win. And if you lose, you also win because you changed and learned and grew. So, just want to give a little bit of framing. We might touch on things that are difficult, and we might say something that touches on a nerve, that touches on some emotions. And no amount of framing that a rabbi can give is going to prevent emotions, and nor should it. Actually, it should encourage emotions. But just some things you can do when you notice that coming up so that you can stay in this space and so that you don't feel like you are shutting down and have to remove yourself from the community and increasing that isolation that we're feeling. The first is that we're here because we care about this community, and ultimately we care about the fate of the world and the Jewish people, and that's important to hold on to even if we don't agree, and that care is broader and more important than our own diagnoses of the problems or solutions. And that when you encounter that disagreement, it's hard. So if it's hard for you, something is going right, not going wrong. We're trying to increase our capacity to hold disagreement lovingly within community. So, some things you can do to enable you to hold that. If you're feeling your body start to shut down and your brain start to not be able to hear, feel your feet. Even push your heels into the ground. Wherever you are, put your feet on the ground and push your back into your chair. These signal safety to your body and to your nervous system, enable you to be back here. Another thing you can do is look around the room. Just getting a sense of the room also signals safety and security to your body and to your nervous system. And specifically naming things. If you find that you're hearing something and you just can't continue hearing, look around the room and be like, okay, red divider, yellow flowers, Rabbi Mark's forehead. And what that does, in addition to bringing your focus back in. It turns the verbal part of your brain back on, which tends to shut down when we go into panic. And also, you might be totally fine the whole time. And that's great. That means you have a great capacity to listen and engage. And you also should notice what feels nourishing to hear. That if you hear something and you say, you know what, I couldn't express that on my own, but I really resonate with that. It's so nice to hear somebody put words to that. Let that sink in, and that's going to happen too. So, the first question I want to ask our panel of rabbis is, what are you grieving this year? Rabbi Mark. I'm moderating. I give the framing and now I'm done.
I'm grieving so much, it's almost impossible to express it. Some of it, those of you who were here yesterday, I did address in my words. I'm of course grieving the horrific events that happened on October 7th, the utter disgusting act of violence that happened on October 7th. Having just watched the documentary about the Nova survivors, and just, the fact that out of 3,500 or so people who were at that party, 260 of them or so were murdered, and many of them were taken hostages. And that savage event that happened that day, it just leaves such a scar of mourning and grief. And of course, I'm grieving the 101 people who remain hostages in Gaza, and I'm grieving the fact that there are still about 60 or 70,000 Israelis who have literally been displaced from their homes since October the 8th in the north. And I'm grieving the fact that the media is so sometimes irresponsible in the way things are reported, and you'd think that the recent escalation of violence in Lebanon started like 2 weeks ago. It started on October the 8th. I'm grieving the fact that the world doesn't see that. On October the 8th, Hezbollah went to war with Israel, and about 100,000 people were displaced from their homes, and 60,000 of them are still displaced from their homes. And some of those homes have been destroyed through the rocket fire that isn't really very reported. I'm grieving all of that. I'm grieving the fact, and I hinted at this yesterday, that people that I thought were my friends and allies on the left disappeared on October the 8th, that there was no acknowledgement of what actually happened in a real kind of way, and that all of the focus was on what happened next and not on what happened on October 7th. And I'm really grieving that. I'm grieving the fact that many progressive groups, including women's advocacy groups, never acknowledged the amount of horrific sexual violence that happened on October 7th. And I'm grieving the fact that, and that's why this conversation is so important, I'm grieving the fact that it's become so hard to talk to people that I care about who don't necessarily agree about the same things, as Rob Jacobs shared in that introduction. And there's so much more. I'm grieving and this is the last thing I say, I love Israel. I'm a Zionist. It's entirely possible I might live in Israel one day when I retire, many years from now, of course. And I'm grieving that the Israel that I fell in love with doesn't feel like it's the same Israel right now. I'm grieving that the Israel that I'm in love with is not necessarily the same Israel that the founders dreamed it could be in terms of the relationships between all the people who live in that land. And I'm grieving the fact that we are, to some extent, as a diaspora Jewish community, given a fantasy about Israel and not a reality about Israel. And whether we're on the left or on the right of things, many people, many American Jews, and we'll touch on this more, don't have a real relationship with Israel. I'm grieving the fact that it's a fantasy of a relationship. So that's some of what I'm grieving, and there's more.
Thank you, Rabbi Mark. Sorry, Rabbi.
Thank you for putting all of that into words. I think it's important to say that I am grieving all of those things as well. There's a line in the book of Lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, the day of grief and mourning, that says, Al Eila, ani bochia, for these, I'm crying. And I feel that for these, I'm crying. When I hear you say that you are grieving that the state of Israel that you love, that you have a deep, abiding commitment to, isn't necessarily reflected in the reality of the state of Israel now, I really feel that grief. And it's hard to hear, but I think I'm probably not the only one here who felt that shock on October the 7th of like something irrevocable has shifted. And really for the first time in my lifetime, I have had to question whether the state of Israel will continue to exist through my lifetime. I was born in the 80s, and I never thought that was unstable in that way or that much of a possibility. And now I don't know what's going to happen. And for that, I feel fear and I feel grief. And alongside those things, because I would like for a state of Israel, especially one in alignment with the Declaration of Independence and the vision of its founders, a democratic state, I do wish to see. At the same time, I do feel a great deal of grief for what we might call moral injury that I see Israel sustaining, which is, and to some extent the diaspora Jewish community, which has largely allied itself with the actions of the state of Israel, which is to say that there is enormous collective punishment of civilians occurring. There is widespread famine. There is danger of epidemic. These things, as we know, affect the young and the old and the sick and the weak, the vulnerable, the people who are not combatants, most profoundly. And it, to me, I have a sense of moral injury, much as I, of course, care for these 100 people who are in captivity. But to me, it seems outrageous that we can care so much for 100 of quote-unquote us and seem to be oblivious or accepting of the suffering of 100,000 people who are without shelter, who are imminent risk of destruction in Gaza. And to me, that is morally, it's not just morally unacceptable, but I can understand how that looks like racism. That looks a lot like racism to the rest of the world, that we can care so much for 100 of us and so little for 100,000 of them, quote unquote. And at root, I don't really believe in an us and a them, and that may make me more idealistic than many are comfortable with. But even if it were not the case that the Palestinians are our close kin and that our liberation is bound up with their liberation, we're all one human family, and the protection of fundamental rights to life, that's a religion that I want to live by. That's the religion I can get behind. So for me, I've also felt a grief in can Judaism really show up for this? Like, not just the Jewish people, but I have always felt very committed to Jewish life and Jewish practice. But if at the end of the day, we have some lovely songs and some great family recipes and this beautiful calendar, but it doesn't actually give us a sound moral guidance in moments of crisis, then what is it for? Then we're just kind of placating ourselves with nice songs and good family recipes and this beautiful calendar. So for me, there's been, I think, a deep shock that, which is, unsurprising. We're just human like everybody else, no more and no less human than everybody else. And people do tend to divide into us and them, especially in times of what feels like real physical insecurity and unsafety, which I think the Jewish diaspora feels, in resonance with Israel. So, maybe that's enough to say, but the one other thing I want to say is, For me, it seems clear that, imagine for a moment the positions were flipped and it was, quote unquote, our people who were being bombed like this and like moved from tent camp to tent camp and under risk of starvation and so forth. We also would be trying to get the media of the world to cover it. We also would be encouraging people to come out in the streets and demonstrate. Absolutely, we would do that if we thought they were our people. And so the kind of lack of moral imagination for why the world is so enraged to see this treatment of people who are trapped, it kind of surprises me. So I grieve that lack of ability to hold the humanity of the other, I guess.
Thank you. Rabbi Mark and Reb Sarah Bracha, both of you mentioned the relationship between the diaspora community, especially the American Jewish community, and the community of Jews in Israel. Rabbi Mark, you said it feels like in America a lot of times we're given a fantasy vision of what Israel is or could be, and we don't have a real relationship with the Israel itself that exists. Maybe in contrast to, you mentioned in our talks, contrast to people from Britain growing up, that you would go to Israel several times by the time your bar mitzvah, and maybe that's different for American Jews. And Reb Sarah Bracha, you said that American Jews in general, we're finding it difficult to hold two perspectives or hold two advocacies, that we feel like we have to pick an advocacy, a community to advocate for. So my question to you is, what in your view does the American or diaspora Jewish community need most now? Rabbi Mark, we'll start with you.
Just before I answer that question, I'm noticing that I'm feeling somewhat activated by some of what my dear friend to my left said. And I just want to respond a little bit, and of course she has the right, it's like the vice president's debate, right? What feels hard to me, and I've just been reading Noah Yuval Harari's new book, which is called Nexus, and it's about information. And one of the things that he says in that book is that information is not a reflection of truth or reality. Information is the way in which humans create networks of connection. And sometimes those networks of connection are created in very positive and beautiful ways, and sometimes they're not. And I feel like information, and of course this goes in both directions, and it will come to the question that you just asked. I feel like there is information that is being disseminated on the left, which shows an incredibly distorted reflection of reality. And of course it happens on the right too, I'm not going to deny that, but the fact that there are people, and this does come to your question, that there are people on the left who are standing behind signs that say things like "Arm Hamas," or standing behind signs that say "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," without having any historical context about what that actually means, without having any historical context about the fact that Hamas put $80 billion into building a network of tunnels, used people as human shields perpetually throughout this conflict. And of course, it's horrific how much civilian life has been lost. But Hezbollah and Hamas, in my view, and again, I'm believing in the information that I'm getting, but I've seen some of the images of the rocket launchers being hidden in people's homes in southern Lebanon, and just this notion that that all that the media in some instances presents is the horrific suffering of Lebanese. Like straight away after some of the airstrikes in southern Lebanon, straight away, all that the New York Times was reporting was a number of Lebanese who died. Didn't say anything about the fact that Hezbollah went to war with Israel on October the 8th. Didn't say anything about the fact that Hezbollah had been hiding rockets and rocket launchers in people's attics and in people's homes, sometimes in children's rooms, and all of that. So it's like it's just this horrendous way in which we polarize the world, and we get different sources of information, and the people who want to believe X will believe X, and the people who want to believe Y will believe Y. So I hear the comment about moral injury and about Judaism showing up with compassion and being part of the human family. And of course, fundamentally, I mean, and Sarah Brach and I have had these conversations before. I think, we have, our birthdays are one day apart. We're both 4s on the Enneagram, right? We're both like
and Aquarians, one day apart.
We both have
they're British.
We both have a fundamental core that is a universalist core. I do. I very much support the human family. But I think maybe I'm just slightly more committed to the particularity of Jewish life beyond just the lovely calendar and the family recipes. I love family recipes, by the way, but
I love the calendar.
I feel like my particularity makes me just a little bit more able to listen to the information that I get about the reality of what Hamas and Hezbollah have been doing. So how that impacts the American Jewish community and how that impacts the relationship between the American Jewish community and Israel is very, very profound. And what Rav Jacob said is absolutely true. It's like if you are engaged in Jewish life in England, in any, whether you're Reform or Conservative or Orthodox, if you're engaged in Jewish life in England, by the time you're 18, you have probably been to Israel twice. By the time you're 30, you've probably been to Israel half a dozen times. If you come from a wealthy, middle, upper-class Jewish family, you probably have a flat in Netanya or Herzliya Batuach where you go every Pesach and every Sukkot, and you have a relationship with a real place. And because of that, I think, and I may be wrong here, this is treading on thin ice, but I think that in general, English Jews are much able to accept nuance and complexity. And I think American Jewish communities are not. And I think many American, and this is by no means a judgment because part of this is just geographical. It's a hard and long and expensive journey to go from Colorado to Israel, whereas you can hop on a plane, in 4 or 5 hours from Heathrow, you can be in Tel Aviv, and not right now, but in other times it can cost you a couple $100 to get a ticket, right? So it's different in terms of that relationship, and I think the way that plays out is, and this is absolutely true of people on the right and people on the left, people have taken strong ideological positions. I know people in JVP and Jewish Voices for Peace who are committed to justice, who are really, really good people. They've never been to Israel. They don't understand the complexity of Israel. They don't know the history of Israel. And yet they are storming Congress and demanding immediate ceasefire because they're so caught up in their ideology. And, the same is true of people on the far right. I know people who firmly support the Jewish settler movement. And some of that is also what I grieve, like some of what we have seen, the settler violence is really, really horrendous in the West Bank. And that has been another byproduct since October 7th. And the fact that there are people in the Israeli government who are literally calling for a Palestinian genocide. I don't believe at all that as far as my understanding of actual definitions of genocide, that this is a genocide. But there are people in the government of Israel who are calling for a genocide. And there are people in America on the right who have very strong perceptions of wanting to support the settler movement to occupy the whole of the West Bank and Judea and Samaria. And it's like, so my position has always been one of nuance and understanding the complexity of it all. So as much as I love Israel, and this is maybe going to come into the next question, but I think I am comfortable being critical of Israel in my sense of really loving and supporting Israel. And so I think that that's my biggest fear about the American Jewish community. The mainstream has taken a very strong position, and then there are people on the left who've got a very, very strong anti-Zionist and very, very negative and damning position, and then there are people on the right who've got an equally or even perhaps more damning position where they want to just occupy the whole region and don't really care what happens to the Palestinians. So how that impacts Jewish communities like ours, I think, is hard because, I do think we have to be able to have these conversations without getting activated, even though I am getting activated a bit.
I think you're handling it very well.
Huh?
Yellow flowers.
Yeah.
Yellow flowers.
What? Oh, yeah. Oh, yellow flowers.
I would just say if this is what it
Random
looks like to
hat.
be activated, we're doing a good job.
Huh?
If this is what it looks like to be activated, we're doing a very good job. And I'll also say, something you said in our conversations before this is that, or maybe I said it and you agreed. Either way, one of us said it.
And I wrote it down in the Google Doc.
One thing we said is that in Israel, there's a diversity of diagnoses of what the problem is and what the solutions are, and it seems like in diaspora communities, we tend to attach to one of those diagnoses of what the problems are and what the solutions are. And it's not even reflective of the conversation within community of Israeli Jews, let's say. There's lots of different approaches and people on the ground doing work in different ways.
Absolutely.
So that's something that I would like the American Jewish community to connect more to. Sarah Bracha.
Yeah. Well, another thing that we sort of put in this Google Doc and framing is also to beware of the tendency to think that other people believe what they believe because they don't have all the information. Like, we all only have partial information, and yes, Nexus is right. We are, pattern recognizing, selecting things that fit with our biases, etc. But I think it is dangerous to assume that anyone who disagrees with you would agree with you if they knew everything you knew, but there's nothing that they know that you don't know that you need to be thinking about. You know what I'm saying? Yes, we could all know more. Yes, we could all have a sharper analysis, probably. One thing, you said it already, Rabbi Mark, when we're thinking about what does the American Jewish community or the diaspora Jewish community need, I do think that more self-education and being willing to look at the information which is disturbing, and that goes hand in hand to me with this moving away from a fantasy, or not telling ourselves, not sufficiently tracking how far to the right Israel has moved, not just in the last 5 years, but in the last 35 years. Mm-hmm. And, when you talk about people, chanting from the river to the sea without enough, critique of what that means. The number of times I've been in Jewish spaces and spaces for the education of Jewish educators where I've seen a map of Israel plus the West Bank with no demarcation, with no recognition whatsoever that the West Bank is not internationally recognized as Israel. It's an occupied territory, and that the people who live there don't have citizenship, do not have passports, things that we consider basic human rights. So I do think we need to be more open to looking at what's uncomfortable, and hand in hand with that, I think, is more space for this kind of, we're going to get activated, but we're going to hang in there, we're going to listen to each other, we're going to have space, because we believe that it's important to keep learning and growing and not just rehearsing our own opinions, as we said before, machloket l'shem shamayim. For me, I think creating a sacred container which has ground rules for witnessing, which has ritual to help us process our emotions, to me that's something which we very much need more of, and which I personally feel called to step up as a facilitator, someone who can hold that kind of space, to offer more in the community here and beyond. And I think the other thing that, what speaks to me, what I need, what I hope that we all need, is a refusal to be divided, from one another, a refusal to be divided from our Israeli family, literal family or metaphorical family, a refusal to be divided from the Jewish world, whether they're far to the left of us or far to the right of us, and also a refusal to be divided from our Palestinian family and our Arab family, the refusal to be divided from other human beings, to for a moment think that any human life is worth more or less than any other human life. That, to me, is what I think we need, is really to remember that our liberation is bound up with one another. Even if it weren't true that we should care just from an altruistic perspective, we need to care from a very practical perspective. We will not have Jewish safety. We will not have Jewish liberation until we have Palestinian liberation. It just can't happen. How could that happen? So for me, that's what's needed. I know that may be that's why we gave the whole spiel about like sit in your seat and feel your feelings. That's how
I find
feel.
myself not disagreeing with anything that you just said.
Yay!
Me neither. If I could answer the question, I think as a diaspora community, something that's frustrated me in my Jewish education was I think sometimes it's easier to emphasize a connection to Israel than it is to emphasize a connection to any other part of Judaism or Torah. And I would just like us to see an emphasis more on the other rituals that exist in Judaism and the other mitzvot and Torah learning, which is our portable heritage. Which is not to say that I want less emphasis on Israel, but just that sometimes it's easier to identify with a place than it is to do a thing. That's what I think I would like us to do.
I wanted to say, those of you who have not yet met Rabbi Jacob Chadnova.
You may wonder what I'm doing.
We only
Who is this guy?
He became part of our full-time team only a few months ago, here with his wife Julia and their brand new baby, Liba Hannah. But Rav Jacob has made it very clear and has already demonstrated just how passionate he is about Torah and how much he wants us to be a congregation that really learns Torah together. And so he's not just saying something for the sake of saying it, he's saying something that he not only passionately believes in, but has the skills to make happen in our community. So
I think that's a good segue. My teacher, Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, always says that if you're going to take people to a dark place or a difficult place in the Dvar Torah, you need to end on a note of nechemta. You need to end on comfort and hope. So what, if anything, gives you hope? Sarah Bracha, we'll start with you. I'm not going to even say, cross out if anything. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope? It gives me hope that we're all still here. You know, we actually showed up today, and we are hanging in there. It did give me hope, actually, when we did in the 3 weeks preceding this entry into this renewal period of the calendar. We have a period of like really focusing on destruction and loss. And during that time, we did have a number of community gatherings to give space to our grief and to be in sacred witness of one another. And what I saw happening in those spaces gave me hope. The deep ability to feel and to listen and to hold perspectives that we didn't know were our perspective, or we don't always give enough airtime in ourselves. I was encouraged and given hope by that. And on the ground, in the Holy Land, I'm personally really encouraged by the organizing of a group called Standing Together, Omdim B'Yachad, and by their fundamental message, which is, you know, this land has 6 or 7 million Jewish residents, it has 6 or 7 million Palestinian residents, and no one is going anywhere. We're all here. We're all here for the long haul. No one has anywhere else to go. Most of them, I'm not an Israeli, has anywhere else to go. And we have to find a new way forward. So that kind of organizing in civil society of people creating a new way forward, you know, and for instance, recently they thought they would fill 1 truck of aid for Gaza, and they filled 500. You know, there is an outpouring of support that people actually want to find a different way. Civil society, when I see the Israeli protest movement, that gives me hope. We don't all actually accede to endless violence. We want to find a new way. So that gives me hope.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I'm just struck by what I quoted in the name of Rachel Goldberg-Polin, the mother of Hirsch Goldberg-Polin, who was killed a few weeks ago in a tunnel in Gaza and was one of the hostages taken from the Nova Music Festival. And she says hope is mandatory. Hope is mandatory. And I have spent time with her, but I don't know her well enough to know what she really meant by that, having now become a mourner in a very tragic circumstance. But I think that she and her husband John have not given up hope. And their hope is not a kind of monolithic kind of Jewish power kind of hope. They are, involved in all kinds of ways. I think that one of the things that kind of dissolved a sense of hope was just how many of the people who were killed on October 7th were peace activists. We know famously Vivian Silva, who was like her whole life had been a peace activist, and she was one of the people killed on Kibbutz Be'eri. And so there's this sense that, I think, in talking to Sarah Bruch about this, I think it's a slightly false narrative that we're given, that the left and the peace movement has just completely died along with October 7th. There are still all kinds of grassroots peace initiatives in Israel that I do still believe in, and they give me hope. Kai Winter is an amazing school called Unity, which is the Givat Chaviva International School, where there are Israelis and Palestinians. There are people from all over the world, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and people of no faith and different faiths, who all come together, and they have this sort of grassroots peace building, and they're in high school together, and they're growing up with a sense that it doesn't have to be like this. The Road to Recovery, an organization, I spent time with the founder of Road to Recovery, who professionally is a juggler, and he started. He started when he learned about a Palestinian that he had a relationship with, whose brother was dying and was being treated in Rambam Hospital in Haifa, and just the difficulties of getting Palestinians from the checkpoints to get the essential treatment, life-saving treatment that they needed. Of course, October 7th has slightly changed it, but there are still like 5,000 Israelis who every day are helping Palestinians get to medical treatments at this organization, Road to Recovery, can't say the Hebrew, but so there are still organizations that believe in a different kind of future, and that there are, many of us met people from Shorashim, the Judo, the Roots Project, which has suffered enormously since October 7th, but they're still working, and it's the same principle that Sarah Bracha said. These are people who are in the West Bank, Jewish settlers and Palestinians, who said, neither of us are going anywhere. We live in these communities. What can we do together? And some of the grassroots peace building that is happening in those organizations, all of those things give me hope. And what gives me hope more than anything else is our resilience. We suffered an unbelievably brutal, horrific tragedy on October the 7th. And yes, there are other people who have suffered enormously since then. But as a human species and as Jews, I think, and as Israelis, there is a resilience that I believe will keep us going. Phil, can I read this really quickly, this short poem, facilitator?
Yes.
Because I do want to come back to some of the framing about this idea of machloket l'shem shamayim. It's so important. I know enough of you to know that there are probably some pretty strong disagreements in this room, right? And sometimes when we feel something so strongly and passionately, what we want to do more than anything else is convince the other person that we're right and they're wrong. And Yehuda Amichai, who was kind of like the poet laureate in Israel, wrote this incredible poem called The Place Where We Are Right, which some of you will know. But he says, from the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood.
Thank you, Rabbi Mark and Rav Sarah Bracha, for sharing authentically in, I think, a pretty vulnerable way, and for modeling that for me and for the community. And thank you to the community for sticking with us. I don't know what any of you experienced just now, but I know that very few of you left the room, and those who did probably had to go to the bathroom. And I also want to thank the people on live stream for also sticking with us. You might not have seen this coming, and I think this is this is part of what we do as a religious community, is we increase our capacity to hold complexity and difficulty and to move forward with hope and find new ways. And that is part of what religion can do for us and for what community can do for us, as Sarah Bracha noted in those listening circles that we held. So thank you very much for allowing us to take this this space.
And allowing also this space, I mean, part of the intention in having this conversation is to grapple with reality. And also we have the sermon right before Musaf, which is the crowning service of our time together, to awaken our hearts, so that now we can actually move into a space of prayer and pray for what really matters. So that's our hope, that this conversation has stirred you in a way that opens you to prayer.
And on that note, I want to really thank Rav Jacob for facilitating us and for all that he has brought since being here. And he is going to transition in 3 minutes to be our Baal Tefillah, to be our prayer leader for Musaf. And I know some of you will likely want to leave right now, but I'm really going to encourage and invite you, because I think exactly as Rabbi Sarah Bracha just said, it's almost like the Musaf is an extension of the conversation. So as much as you are able, I would really like to invite you to stay, at least for some of Musaf. We're going to hear many more shofar blasts. We're going to have reached some very profound parts of our liturgy. And so, we hope that we'll be together for most of Musaf. And thank you so much for being here and staying with it, as Rav Jacob said. And let's just take a breath and just, maybe even if you want to if you have something that you really need to share with the person next to you, we can take a minute to share that. Some of you may really want to offload something. Could be something positive, could be something negative, something
Or you
painful.
can have a little shake, just stand up and stretch.
Return to the land of your soul. Return again. Return again. Return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return to who you are. Return to what you are. Return to where you are. Born and reborn again. Return again. Return again. Return to the land of your soul. Return again. Return again. Return to the land of your soul.